April 5, 1933. A date that should live in infamy alongside Pearl Harbor and 9/11. But unlike those attacks, this one came from within. On this day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Not gold jewelry, not gold coins passed down through generations, all of it. With the stroke of a pen, private property became contraband, and the greatest wealth transfer in American history began. This isn't ancient history. This happened less than a century ago. And the mechanisms that allowed it? They're still on the books today. To understand how FDR pulled off the largest confiscation of private wealth in peacetime history, you need to understand the crisis he inherited. March 1933. America was drowning in the Great Depression. 25% unemployment, banks failing by the hundreds, bread lines stretching for blocks. But here's what they don't teach you in school. The crisis wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve had controlled America's money supply, and in the late 1920s, they inflated a massive credit bubble. Easy money flooded into stocks. The Dow Jones went from 191 in 1928 to 381 in September 1929. Then the Fed slammed on the brakes. They contracted the money supply by 1/3 between 1929 and 1933. The result? Predictable. The stock market crashed. Banks collapsed. And Americans, watching their savings evaporate, did the rational thing. They withdrew their money and converted it to gold. This was their right. Since 1879, the United States had been on a gold standard. Every dollar was backed by gold, and citizens could exchange their paper money for gold coins at any time. By law, the government maintained a reserve of gold to back the currency. This wasn't a privilege. This was the foundation of the monetary system. But there was a problem. The Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury didn't have enough gold to honor all the redemptions. Years of fractional reserve banking meant they'd issued far more paper dollars than they had gold to back them. The jig was up. Roosevelt took office on March 4, 1933. 2 days later, he declared a national banking holiday, closing every bank in America. The official reason? To prevent bank runs. The real reason? To trap Americans' wealth inside a system that was about to rob them blind. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102. The full title, Forbidding the Hoarding of Gold Coin, Gold Bullion, and Gold Certificates. Let's break down what this actually meant. Under the order, all American citizens were required to turn in their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1, 1933. That's 25 days. You had less than a month to surrender wealth that might have taken your family generations to accumulate. In exchange, you received paper dollars at the rate of $20.67 per troy ounce of gold. This was the official gold price that had been fixed since 1834. You had no choice in the matter. If you owned more than $100 worth of gold, about 5 ounces, you were required by law to hand it over. The exceptions were tiny. Dentists and jewelers could keep gold for their trade. You could keep gold jewelry and rare coins with collectible value. But your gold savings, your store of wealth, gone. And here's the kicker. If you refused, you faced up to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. That's equivalent to about $230,000 today. For the crime of keeping your own property. Think about that. In the land of the free, the government criminalized ownership of the one asset that had served as money for 5,000 years of human civilization. But the theft didn't end there. It got worse. In January 1934, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act. This law did 2 things. First, it officially transferred all gold held by the Federal Reserve to the U.S. Treasury. Second, and this is crucial, it revalued gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Do the math. That's a 69% increase, overnight. The government had just forced Americans to sell their gold at $20.67 per ounce, then immediately repriced that same gold at $35 per ounce. The Treasury pocketed the difference. Roughly $2.8 billion in 1934 dollars. That's nearly $65 billion in today's money. This wasn't a bailout. This wasn't quantitative easing. This was confiscation and revaluation. The government paid you $20 for something, then declared it was worth $35 and kept the profit. It was the greatest wealth transfer from private citizens to the government in American history. So how did Roosevelt justify this? How did he convince Americans that surrendering their wealth was patriotic? The official line was that gold hoarding was prolonging the Depression. According to the Roosevelt administration, selfish citizens were pulling gold out of circulation, strangling the money supply, and preventing economic recovery. By confiscating gold, the government could expand the money supply, lower interest rates, and stimulate the economy. This was nonsense on multiple levels. First, what Roosevelt called hoarding was actually rational behavior. When banks are failing and the currency is unstable, converting paper money to gold isn't hoarding. It's survival. It's people protecting themselves from a system that had already robbed them through inflation and bank failures. Second, the real problem wasn't gold hoarding. It was fractional reserve banking. The Federal Reserve and commercial banks had created far more paper claims on gold than actual gold existed. When people tried to redeem those claims, the pyramid scheme collapsed. The solution wasn't to confiscate gold. The solution was to stop the fraud of fractional reserve banking. But here's the deeper truth. Roosevelt needed to confiscate gold because he wanted to devalue the dollar. As long as citizens could redeem dollars for gold at a fixed rate, the government couldn't inflate the money supply. Gold acted as a constraint on monetary expansion. By confiscating gold and breaking the link between dollars and gold, Roosevelt freed the government to print money without limit. This is what the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 accomplished. By raising the official gold price from $20.67 to $35, Roosevelt devalued the dollar by 41% against gold. This made American exports cheaper, which helped certain industries. But it also destroyed the purchasing power of every dollar held by every American citizen. Your savings just lost 41% of their value. And there was nothing you could do about it. Now you might be thinking, surely some people resisted. Surely some Americans refused to hand over their gold. They did. And the government crushed them. The most famous case was that of Frederick Barber Campbell. In 1933, Campbell, a New York lawyer, deposited 27 gold bars, worth about $200,000, into a safe deposit box at Chase National Bank. He refused to surrender them to the government. The Treasury Department found out. In 1936, they indicted Campbell for violating the Gold Reserve Act. The case went to trial. Campbell's defense was simple. The Constitution protects private property. The Fifth Amendment says the government cannot take private property without just compensation. Forcing him to exchange gold for devalued paper dollars wasn't just compensation, it was theft. The court disagreed. Campbell was found guilty. The judge ruled that in a time of national emergency, the government had the authority to regulate gold ownership in the interest of national welfare. Campbell lost his gold. The precedent was set. The government could confiscate private property, call it regulation, and face no constitutional consequences. But here's what most people don't know. The government didn't actually confiscate most of America's gold. They didn't have to. The threat of prison and massive fines was enough. Millions of Americans complied. They walked into banks, handed over their gold, and received paper dollars in return. Some estimates suggest that about 25% of all gold in private hands was turned in. That's roughly 300 tons of gold. But millions of ounces stayed hidden, buried in backyards, locked in secret safes, smuggled overseas. Americans who knew history understood. When the government comes for your wealth, you don't comply. You hide it. Executive Order 6102 remained in effect for over 40 years. From 1933 to 1974, it was illegal for Americans to own gold bullion. You could own rare coins. You could own jewelry. But you could not own gold as an investment or a store of wealth. Think about that. For 4 decades, American citizens were banned from owning the one asset that had protected wealth throughout human history. While their government inflated the money supply, debased the currency, and destroyed the dollar's purchasing power, Americans were prohibited from protecting themselves with gold. It wasn't until December 31, 1974, that President Gerald Ford signed a bill legalizing private gold ownership again. And even then, the government maintained tight controls. They could reimpose restrictions at any time. Why did they finally legalize gold? Because by 1974, the dollar was in free fall. Nixon had closed the gold window in 1971, ending the last remnant of the gold standard. Inflation was raging. The government needed to restore some confidence in the dollar, and allowing gold ownership was a pressure valve. But here's the critical point. The legal framework for confiscation still exists. Executive Order 6102 was never repealed. It simply expired. The authority claimed by Roosevelt in 1933, the authority to declare a national emergency and confiscate private property, that authority is still on the books. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, amended in 1933, gives the president broad powers to regulate financial transactions during national emergencies. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 expanded those powers even further. If the government wanted to confiscate gold again, they have the legal machinery to do it. So what are the lessons of Executive Order 6102? First, your government can and will confiscate your wealth if it suits their purposes. The Constitution won't stop them. Courts won't protect you. If they want your assets, they'll create a crisis, declare an emergency, and take them. Second, paper money is not wealth. It's a claim on wealth. And that claim can be devalued, inflated, or defaulted on at any time. In 1933, Americans learned this the hard way. They thought their dollars were as good as gold because the government promised they were. That promise was a lie. Third, gold is not just an investment. It's insurance against government theft. The reason Roosevelt confiscated gold wasn't because it was worthless. It was because gold was the one asset the government couldn't print, couldn't devalue, and couldn't control. Gold represented an escape hatch from their monetary manipulation, so they criminalized the escape hatch. Fourth, financial repression is a feature, not a bug. When governments get into debt they can't repay, they don't default. They inflate, they devalue, they confiscate. This has happened throughout history. Ancient Rome debased their coinage. Weimar Germany printed papier marks into oblivion. And in 1933, the United States government stole their citizens' gold and devalued the dollar by 41%. And fifth, it can happen again. The United States national debt is now over $36 trillion. Unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare exceed $200 trillion. The government cannot pay these debts with tax revenue. They will pay them by destroying the currency. And when that process accelerates, they will need to prevent capital flight. That means controls on gold, silver, cryptocurrency, and any other asset that allows citizens to escape the devaluation. Executive Order 6102 wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't a one-time emergency measure that could never happen again. It was a template, a blueprint for how governments confiscate wealth when they're drowning in debt and desperate for assets. The gold in Fort Knox. Most of it came from American citizens who were forced to hand it over in 1933. That gold was supposed to back the dollar. Instead, it backed nothing. The government spent the wealth, printed the dollars, and left Americans holding worthless paper. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, the debt levels, the money printing, and the political desperation look a lot like 1933. The question isn't whether they'll come for your wealth again. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Disclaimer. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It explores historical events and economic theories, including controversial perspectives. This is not financial advice. Always conduct your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any financial decisions.